Hey everybody, I know it's been a while since we made a video, but as you know, race car parts cost money and also life happens sometimes, so I haven't been out in the shop as much as I'd like to. However, when I have been out here, I've gotten at least a little bit of work done. As you can hopefully see in the background behind me here, short blocks coming together for the motor that we're going to put in the B-Mod this year. I'm actually going to be stabbing a cam into that here shortly. That's not what this video is about though. What this video is about is actually just recently there was a rule change for the class that I race in, for the USRA B-Mod class, that allows us to run full roller rockers, full roller rocker arms on our engines. That got me thinking back a little bit about the video that I did about the cylinder head technology in our engines. And now some of that stuff's going to change. So I figured I'd do an update. First of all, just talking about the difference between the different kinds of rocker arms that you can run on a small block Chevy, for those of you that aren't familiar with that, kind of comparing some pros and cons. And then if you skip towards the end of the video, I'm going to talk about what specifically that means for us B-Mod racers, and why this rule change, A, may have been a long time coming, but B, also is a little bit of a controversial one depending on who you talk to. So here you see basically the three kinds of rocker arms that are commonly seen on a small block Chevy. Now real quick, I'm going to assume that most of you know what a rocker arm is and what it does, but in case you're not familiar, this sits on top of the cylinder head, on top of the valve, and your push rod rides on this end, your valve tip rides on this end, and it takes the motion of the cam lobe and transfers it into this rocking motion that opens and closes the valve. For those of you guys who are into the import stuff or the overhead cam stuff, you don't have to worry about this. Lucky you. This one here actually is the stock rocker arm off of a factory small block Chevy. It's made out of stamped steel, and it's got this little ball that rides inside it. So this sits on the shaft, or the stud, actually, that sticks up out of the head. The stud goes through there, and oil comes up through the push rod. You can kind of see that little hole. You can kind of see the light coming through it, where the push rod rides. Those are hollow, so it oils that through the push rod, and that gives like a film of oil for this to slide on, rock back and forth. That actually does a pretty good job for a factory engine that's not going to rev much higher or have much higher spring pressure than, say, your average stock engine, 5,000, 5,500 RPM. The next thing that you could do to upgrade that is go to this guy here, which is a roller tip rocker. Now, for years, this is what us B-Mod guys were required to run. You can see it's pretty similar in construction to the stock rocker. Only difference is it's got this trunnion here that a roller rides on, and that's on the valve tip side. So it reduces friction on the valve tip. And theoretically, that's going to improve reliability somewhat. However, these have basically the same weakness that these do, and that's this little guy. You still have essentially the possibility for metal-to-metal contact. And if you look in here, it's hard to see. Let's see if we can get some light. Yeah, you can see those shiny spots in there, where despite the oil that's, filling this thing up as it runs, you still get occasional metal-to-metal contact, and it's going to overheat and wear out over time. These guys will break. In fact, it's one of the most common failures in a B-Mod motor is a broken rocker arm. You really have to replace them, I would say probably every 15 to 20 races at least, if you want to make sure that you're not going to have a failure with these guys. Next up, and probably the most spendy, fanciest option that the average engine builder is going to use, is a full roller rocker arm. So not only does it have the little roller here where it rides on the valve tip, rather than having that ball and that sliding action in the middle, it rides on this trunnion here that's got a hole in it, rides on the stud, and that guy can just spin freely on bearings. So a lot less friction, a lot less potential for heat, for galling, and for damage, and theoretically this is a much more reliable piece. They also, this is an aluminum one, so it has to be really bulky in order to meet the strength requirements. But that you can also get these made out of, say, stainless steel that are a lot less bulky than that if you have say you're going to run a really big valve spring and you're worried about clearance in here. It's not really an issue for us B-Mod guys. But yeah, now we're allowed to run these. So that changes some factors about what I talked about before in my cylinder head technology video about what parts we put into our engines. So if you'll remember in my cylinder head technology video where I talked about the parts that we run for the B-Mod motors, I used this scale to kind of weigh various components and talk about how that affects the performance of the engine. Well, let's take a look at how much these different rocker arms weigh. Your factory one weighs about 96 grams. Your roller tip is actually a little bit heavier, about 112 grams. And when we put this big old monstrosity on there, almost 200 grams, 192 grams. It's literally more than twice as heavy as the factory rocker arm. So the question isn't just why wouldn't you use the most robust, most durable piece that you possibly can in your racing engine. You also got to think about the weight of your valve train. This guy has a higher potential for failure, and I've seen this confirmed on dyno tests on some pretty reputable channels and shows, you increase the chance of the possibility of valve float when you make your rocker arm that much heavier. You know, these things are going back and forth. Say at 6,000 RPM, this valve is opening and closing 50 times a second. You know, force equals mass times acceleration. So the force goes up in accordance with the mass of this rocker arm. And that makes it harder for the valve spring to control. So in addition to introducing this rule that we're allowed to run the full roller rocker arms, they're also introducing a valve spring rule. I believe it's a max of 130 pounds on the seat and 350 pounds open. That means that you can't just run a bigger valve spring to control the heavier mass of this rocker arm. So there actually is going to be a little bit of a trade-off as guys decide, do I want to take that risk of valve float? Do I want to look at potentially having to re-engineer what cam I run and essentially my entire valve train system? Or do I want to just stick with the devil that I know and replace these guys every so many races? That's something that I'm going to have to think about, certainly as I put this motor together. And hopefully I'll get a chance to do some dyno testing and really get an educated answer on that rather than just guessing about whether or not this big old honking rocker arm is going to introduce valve float. And if I do get a chance to do that, you'll definitely see it on the channel. Hopefully this video was informative for you. Hopefully you learned a little bit. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If so, please give the channel a like, or give the video a like, give the channel a subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you back here for our next one.